Let's talk about one of the grumpiest mom introductions in cinema as we meet Coraline's mother. Welcome back to Scenic Saturdays on the Fangirl. I'm McGann, and today we're in my rough estimate of what season 4 of Coraline looks like, where we get to meet Coraline's mother, Mel Jones, and see the button-eyed doll resurface. Before we get started, let me address a few comments that I saw that I thought were really great in the Scene 3 video. BB Max World said, another thing about the fairy ring, I don't know if you ever watched it or read the book, but in the Spiderwick Chronicles, they put a fairy ring around their house which keeps all the monsters and fairies from entering. It has a magic force field around it. That's so very true and an angle I've not really thought of, and I have referenced Spiderwick Chronicles to Coraline before, but I've never heard anybody discuss that the fairy ring, that mushroom ring around the well, could have been keeping things from coming into the well, or potentially out of the well if something sinister was below the hatch. Then, in regards to why Mrs. Lovat would let Coraline's family move into the Pink Palace if she doesn't allow children to live there, David Fitzpatrick 6535 wrote, unless, of course, Coraline's parents lied on the rental application when it asked if they had kids. They said no because they're desperate for a place to live, hoping that the landlord isn't the type of person that snoops around. Again, I never thought of this, but I love that idea. Although Mrs. Lovat definitely lives within screaming distance of the Pink Palace, so I'm not sure how that would work out long term, but everything we see about Coraline's parents up until the very end of the movie does not show us good people. The dad tips the movers $1, which is insulting. They drive extremely recklessly, and they let their only child wander off into the hillside forest all alone, knowing nothing about the area. And that's all before the stuff we're going to talk about today. So yeah, the Jones family aren't very good people. And maybe they did lie and say they didn't have children to try to pay less rent or to con their way into an apartment that doesn't allow kids. Nice thoughts, guys. Okay, now jumping into scene 4 today, we're going from Coraline fading into her kitchen with a rash until Coraline leaves the kitchen with the Coraline doll and goes to bother her dad. And that's going to cover the Coraline and Mel dynamic for the first time on screen. So Coraline is at the kitchen sink, scratching her poison oak rash and setting up plant seed packets in this hopeful kind of hint way. And Coraline desperately wants Mel's attention because she uses this very dramatic way of talking like, I almost fell down a well yesterday, Mom. And Mel is at her computer on the kitchen table, seeming to be gray rocking her daughter by just saying, Clearly, Mom is busy working from home. However, there's a boundary problem here. Coraline wants attention, she's feeling neglected, so she's spreading out things that she wants to do, such as planting seeds, and she's saying things to try and provoke an emotional response from her mother. And when Mel doesn't take the bait, Coraline ups the ante by saying that she could have died, to which Mom absent-mindedly responds, that's nice. And the boundary problem is really on both sides here. Coraline is definitely not respecting that her parents are under a lot of stress and that they do need to focus when they work from home. And here, Mel is not respecting that her daughter just went through a traumatic move and needs attention and reassurance. And by the way Mel and Charlie both act in this scene, I have the impression that they don't have work from home hours. That they're basically just working from the time they wake up till the time they go to bed, and that is a boundary issue and not fair to Coraline. And it's also odd that Coraline's family had to move so quickly that they don't even have time to stop and unpack. Coraline said that she almost fell down a well yesterday, which was their move-in day. And instead of focusing on that and getting this new house in order, the parents are both immediately drowning in work. Something about this doesn't add up or make sense, because we'll see in a minute that Charlie, Coraline's dad, is writing what looks like an introduction to gardening. If they have a contract that already has pages due, you. They shouldn't have put off starting the book for this long. You don't have pages due the same week that you get the job. Why were they even moving in the middle of this project? It's almost as if they were running away from something in a hurry. But back to the moment we're currently in, Coraline sees she's not getting results with her mother, so she switches tactics. So instead of saying shocking statements that are getting ignored, Coraline requests to go out and do gardening in the rain. She makes it into a question that her mother actually has to use brain power to respond to. It forces Mel to put her work down. And Mel takes a second to do a cost-benefits analysis before telling Coraline that no, she doesn't want her daughter to get muddy and make a mess that Mel will then have to deal with. And when Coraline says she wants stuff growing when her friends show up, it's showing us that Coraline has zero gardening knowledge. Because when she was outside yesterday, it was clearly wintry out there. And especially when you live in northern states like Michigan and Oregon, you don't plant seeds in the winter. And Coraline pleads with a, "Isn't that why we moved here, so things could grow?" And her mom, being annoyed that she has to split her focus again, says something like that, which to me sounds like the parents told Coraline that they were leaving Detroit because it was crowded and dirty and nothing could grow. And they spun this whole fantasy about how lovely Oregon would be, not because they meant it, but because they needed to manipulate Coraline to make her as pliable as possible. Again, these are not top-tier parents that we're dealing with here. Then Mel references an accident and points at her neck. Okay, so often people have fought with me that she's wearing a turtleneck. No! Look more closely. It's a neck brace. And from the way we saw Mel driving around that truck with no clearance before, I believe she's usually a terrible driver. It also makes me wonder if that car accident wasn't the real reason why the Jones family moved. They had to run away and make themselves more difficult to find for a lawsuit after Mel crashed into someone, causing some serious and probably pricey damage. And a bunch of potential legal fees would also be a really great excuse for the family to be broke. Now, Coraline tries to argue back about the hypocrisy of her mother writing about plants but hating the idea of dirt, and Mel gets snippy. She says she doesn't have time for Coraline right now, and that Coraline has lots of unpacking to do. And that's true, but so do you, Mel. And Coraline rolls her eyes and sarcastically says how exciting unpacking sounds. And during this entire back and forth here, you can really see Coraline's immaturity and inability to regulate her own emotions. She's bored, and even at the age of 11, she expects everyone else to entertain her, and she cannot see outside of herself to process that by doing this, she is making her neglect take longer because she's interrupting her mother's work. Most kids by that age are fairly independent and don't act this way. And Coraline herself was being extremely independent the day before by going out into the woods. So I wonder if this move is causing Coraline to regress in some ways when even the prospect of setting up her new room doesn't interest her. Then Mel's attitude drops and she tells Coraline that a kid left a wrapped up newspaper on the porch for her. Of course, it's the Coraline button-eyed doll, but look at it. Here's what the doll looked like when the beldam finished it, and here it is now. YB left a note saying that he took it from his grandmother's trunk, so this doll has been tucked away, not exposed to the elements and such, for supposedly a very long time. And here the doll is filthy around the nose, the sides of the face, the jacket, the hands. What happened? Unless that doll was made decades ago and played with fairly hard, that doesn't make any sense. And I don't think that these marks are ink stains from the newspaper, because that would have, at best, rubbed off on the doll in places that stuck out, like the nose or the hands. The newspaper shouldn't have touched the sides of the doll's face. We also don't see any smudges on the paper, so no, that dirtiness didn't come from the wrapping. So that doll is either very old, which doesn't necessarily work if Grandma Lovat has had it for years, because at some point the doll was altered to look like Coraline and then replaced inside the trunk. And Mrs. Lovat would have seen that doll many times over the years. She even seems to check for it because within a few days she knows it's missing and YB is in trouble. So it feels like the doll has been moving around on its own to get this dingy looking. If the doll can move by itself, that explains how it got in and out of Grandma's trunk. But again, we have nothing to even hint to us that that's the case. So it really feels to me like YB is working with the beldam to make these things happen. And that especially rings true when you consider that YB stole his grandmother's property and gave it away without asking. And then here we have Coraline stating that she's way too old for dolls, but then she proceeds to walk away and play with it. So again, we see this weird thing with Coraline where she should be more independent, more adult-like, but yet even though she recognizes that, she still plays with toys and she still gets very codependent on her parents giving her attention. And neither of those are necessarily bad things, but it does tell us that Coraline has a lot of duality in her personality. And we're going to end this scene here today. Next, we're going to get into Charlie and the rest of the house and finding the little door. But this first scene with Coraline and her mother really has a lot in it. And to any of my members here on YouTube, a huge bottom of my heart thank you for all of your help and support. If you would like to become a paid channel member, there is a link in the description below. Thanks again, guys. Love you. Well, family members, we're almost done, but I want to invite you to hang out with me in some other places. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as my own personal self, and I have a Facebook page too, but I mostly just post photos over there. And sometimes people say, "Hey McGann, I want to mail you something. How do I do that?" Easy. Just click the About tab on my channel page, and my most current P.O. Box info will be right there. I also run another channel, The Family. It's really a hodgepodge channel where we might post anything. Oh yeah, and I also sell shirts and stickers and stuff with the Family and the Fangirl logos. If that is your cup of tea, I have a link in every description of every video. Finally, if you want to help out the Fangirl channel and make sure I'm putting out video essays for years to come, the best way you can help is by subscribing and watching more of my videos, whether they're new, old, whatever. Maybe even share one or two on social media, help spread the word. People who watch to the end of videos like you helps to tell the site, hey, this is a good video, we should recommend it to other people. So if you made it this far, leave me a comment of something like, hey, I made it to the end. Love ya. See you next time, family members. Bye.